I was the cupbearer to the king of Persia, maintaining thus a position of comfort and security. However, I put all this at risk upon learning of the fall of the walls of Jerusalem. In this video, you will discover how I convinced the enemy king to support me in my mission to rebuild the massive wall. It's how you can face all life's threats and intimidations just as I did with my own people. My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story. Imagine me, a guy far from home for so many years because of my people's exile. We were captured and taken away from Israel because of our sins against God. King Nebuchadnezzar invaded Israel several times and took many people with him, including my people. Years passed, King Nebuchadnezzar died, but we were still there, far from home. Now King Artaxerxes of Persia was in power. I became his humble cupbearer there in the capital, Susa. Despite being in Persia, my heart was in Jerusalem, 800 miles away. I felt the weight of their suffering even without having experienced it personally. One day, some of my brothers came from Judah, and then I asked them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile in Jerusalem. And they said, the city wall is completely destroyed, the gates burnt down. A real disaster. And the worst part is they're being called survivors. Imagine, without decent protection, they have no way to keep themselves safe. Everything valuable is there, at the mercy of anyone who wants to take it. And that's a constant worry because they never know when they'll be attacked. When I heard all this, I was devastated. I couldn't even stand up, my legs gave out. I sat down and cried, man. I spent days mourning, unable to eat properly. I prayed to God, asking for help. I didn't go looking for quick fixes out there. I knew there was only one thing to do, pray. And pray with all my might. I knew exactly who I was directing my prayers and fasts to. There are many gods out there that people put their faith in, but I knew that only the God of heaven could meet my needs. Remember my job as the king's cupbearer? It was a crucial role in the court. I had to taste the wine and food for the king, ensuring nothing was poisoned. It was a position that required absolute trust. And the king trusted me. I was known to be a man of impeccable character, someone the king could rely on completely. After months of prayer and waiting, the day finally came when everything would change. I had a heavy expression, mourning for Jerusalem. And it was the first time the king noticed that something was wrong. He came to ask me what was happening. And let me tell you, in the king's court, sadness was not welcome. They thought that just by being near the king, all worries vanished. So you can imagine the shock when the king told me that I could only be sad in my heart. I was tense right then. But I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. I explained that I couldn't be all smiles when the city where my ancestors are buried was all destroyed, with the gates burned and all. Then the king asked me what I wanted. And at that moment, I knew there was a lot at stake. What I was going to ask for could change everything. But I understood that it wasn't just about me, so I prayed, asked God for help, and went to speak to the king. I gathered my courage and asked if he would be willing to send me to Judah, where my ancestors are buried, to rebuild the city. And then, with the queen by his side, he asked me about the details of the journey and when I would return. I didn't waste any time. I already had everything planned out. In addition to asking for permission to go, I also requested letters to the governors on the other side of the Euphrates River, ensuring a safe passage. And that wasn't all. I also asked for a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal forest, to obtain wood to rebuild the gates, the walls, and my own house. And the king, as kind as he was, granted all my requests. I clearly felt God's hand working in my favor. I was accompanied by officials and cavalry soldiers ready to begin the reconstruction. Additionally, I had a good amount of wood from the king, a substantial supply that would ensure the start of the work. But then the problems began. Right from the start, I ran into two unfriendly characters, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite. They were not at all pleased with my arrival, especially because I was there to look after the interests of Jerusalem and the people of Israel. For them, it was better if Jerusalem remained weak and vulnerable. As long as the temple was there, they were okay with it, as long as the people weren't strong and secure. But I didn't let that deter me. This opposition didn't show up during the preparations, nor in my prayers, nor in the plans. It was only when I started to act that they decided to make themselves known. I arrived in Jerusalem with a lot of dreams, a lot of hope, a lot of prayer, and the help of the king, but I kept everything secret until the right moment. After spending 3 days in the city, I went out at night with some people to take a look at the walls. There I was, facing the valley gate, surveying the damage. The walls were destroyed, the gates burned. It was a heartbreaking scene. As much as I could recall the good things about the city, it was hard to ignore the reality of the damage. We were forced to leave Judah, but now we were back. The temple was there, sacrifices and worship were happening, but there was still much to be done. It was time to face the problems head-on. And that's exactly what I did. Without telling anyone. The officials had no idea what I was plotting. I hadn't said anything yet to the people, the priests, nobles, or anyone else who would be involved in the work. And you know what? They probably had accepted it as impossible. After all, fixing something that had been broken for so long seemed like an impossible mission. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. So, I gathered the city leaders and shared my vision to rebuild the walls. I explained how God's gentle hand was upon me and what the king had told me. We needed to make sure it was God's project. And their response was amazing. "Let's start rebuilding," they said. And so we began this great work. But while we were there, working hard to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, Gesem the Arab, Sanballat, and Tobias started to belittle us. They were laughing in our faces, saying that we were plotting a rebellion against the king. The worst part was that Tobias had his influences because of connections with the high priest's family. And his name, Tobias, means Jehovah is good. What irony, considering he was going against the work of God. And you know who else was in on this? My own brothers and the citizens of Jerusalem. You would expect them to support me, but they didn't even do that. When your own brothers turn their backs, it feels like betrayal cuts even deeper. Sanballat and Tobias didn't stop there, though. They used contempt as a weapon, trying to make us feel like fools. They mocked us, ridiculed us, asking if we thought we could rebel against the king. That just shows how much they underestimated the power of God. They didn't even know that the king had already given us his blessing, that he was on our side. I went straight to the point and told them that the God of heaven would grant us success in the reconstruction. We, who were committed to this work, would start building Jerusalem from scratch. But as for them, well, they had no rights over Jerusalem. We moved forward working hard. The high priest and the other priests led the way, starting with the reconstruction of the Sheep Gate, one of the main entrances to the city. These gates were crucial, you know? They were the most vulnerable point for any enemy attack. That's why we dedicated special time to consecrate them, showing that they were destined for the glory and care of God. Each man had his role in this endeavor. Every family, every person had their responsibility. Of course, most people joined in to work, but there are always those who prefer to stay out. There was even the fish gate, which was repaired by people from different professions, not by professional builders. They didn't have the necessary skills, but still got involved. Despite excuses, they faced the challenge and did the work. While many people stayed out, these guys, they built walls around Jerusalem, installed beams, and put up gates with bolts and locks. It was hard work, but they took responsibility to do it right, for God's sake. We managed to bring people from all walks of life together to work side by side. There was the guy who lived in a single room, right alongside the leaders and the high priest. It didn't matter if someone had a bit of a complicated past. I didn't push anyone away. But when Sanballat found out we were rebuilding the wall, he went ballistic. In front of everyone, he mocked us, asking what a bunch of weaklings like us were doing. He doubted we could pull it off, and Tobias, the Ammonite, chimed in too, asking if we thought we could raise a wall from burnt stones and rubble. They got all worked up, indignant. And you know, even though we knew rebuilding a wall isn't a one-day job, that we didn't have the best tools, we didn't argue with them. We didn't waste time forming committees. I took all of this to God in prayer. I prayed like this: "Listen, Lord, we're being scorned. Return their insult upon their own heads." When you're in the midst of hard work, it's easy to get discouraged by the criticism and threats from others. Sanballat, Tobias, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod were furious when they saw us closing the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem. They weren't just complaining or mocking, no. They were threatening, planning violence. It was serious. The wall we were building was precisely to protect us from such attacks, but it seemed like the wall itself was provoking an assault. Imagine the confusion and concern this stirred up. People could have been terrified, thinking all our hard work would be in vain. But you know what we did? We prayed even more. We established a guard, day and night, and we didn't stop crying out to God. Even when the attacks continued, we didn't lose faith. I was determined not to let anything stop me from working, not even the constant threat of enemies. That attitude sent a powerful message. It showed that we were committed to God's work no matter what adversities we faced. And that, my friend, is what kept us steadfast and allowed us to move forward even in the face of the greatest challenges. The truth is, when God starts a work, nothing can stop it. There may be sleepless nights, exhausting days, but we're willing to face it all because we trust God completely. Our faith isn't just words, it's a faith that translates into action. But you know, it wasn't all easy. Besides the external difficulties, we also had to deal with internal problems. Some people from Judah were saying they couldn't take it anymore, that there were so many ruins that it would be impossible to rebuild the wall. Imagine that, Judah, the tribe of the valiant, of powerful kings, now feeling so discouraged. And the truth is, even with so much work already done, we still had a lot ahead of us. Rebuilding the walls wasn't just about stacking stones. It was also about clearing away all the clutter that had accumulated over the years. The ruins had become a dumping ground for all kinds of debris. But we had no choice. We needed to do this to move forward. Removing the rubble was as important as building the new walls. The walls needed to be rebuilt from the foundations up, or they wouldn't withstand even a slight breeze. And let me tell you, our adversaries weren't playing around. They were plotting to attack us and stop the work at any cost. The workers were already disheartened, feeling like they had lost the battle before it even began. But then, like a ray of hope, some people living nearby came to tell us about the enemy's wicked plan. They were plotting everything, but guess what? God was always one step ahead. And you know, the enemies didn't even realize they had loyal people among them, listening to every detail of their plan. You know what I did? I didn't cower in fear. Instead, I organized a strategy. I positioned some armed individuals behind the weakest points of the wall, ready to face any threat. And when I gathered the officials and the rest of the people, I told them not to fear. I reminded everyone that the Lord was on our side and that we needed to fight for our families, for our homes. So, I instructed them to bring their weapons because it was time to take protection seriously and be ready to fight with all we had. Even though the task was daunting, we couldn't let fear paralyze us. It was time to take action with courage and determination. And let me tell you, when the enemy saw our defenses, they started to back off. They didn't want to face the fight because they knew they would lose. They were counting on our lack of vigilance, but they were mistaken. From then on, I divided my men. Half worked on the wall, and the other half remained armed, ready for any encounter. The officers stood at the rear, supporting the people of Judah. While I built the wall, those who carried supplies didn't slack off. They worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other. So, I gathered the nobles, the officers, and the rest of the people. I explained that our work was spread out and we needed to stay united. I arranged a signal of alert. Whenever they heard the sound of the trumpet, it was time to come together and face the challenge together because we knew that God was on our side. Furthermore, I organized teams to keep watch, both day and night. No one relaxed, not me, not my brothers, not the men with me. Everyone remained on alert, even when fetching water. But then came the internal challenge. Some people started to complain. Financial problems directly affected our reconstruction work. People were putting in their maximum effort on the walls, leaving little time to attend to their families' needs. Food scarcity also drove up prices, leading some to mortgage their properties to afford food. Furthermore, the government continued to impose taxes, even though many weren't working as much, and the cost of living rose. These taxes weren't the fault of those paying them, but they still posed a heavy burden. People were struggling to survive, and the loans they took out to do so were accumulating interest, making repayment difficult. As a result, some were forced to pledge their children as collateral to work and pay off debts. The wealthy took advantage of the crisis to profit from the less fortunate, charging exorbitant interest rates. If we didn't find a solution to these financial problems, God's reconstruction work would have to halt, even without any enemy attacking us. That's why I called for a large assembly to address this issue head-on. It was time to find a solution that would allow us to continue the reconstruction work without sacrificing the basic needs of our people. When I confronted those who were exploiting our own people, their reaction was one of awkward silence. They were left speechless, without arguments. So, together with my companions, we decided to take action. We began by lending money and providing food to the needy. I ordered the nobles to stop charging interest and to return the properties they had taken as collateral, including fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, along with the accumulated interest. They agreed and promised to change their practices. I convinced them to swear before priests and officials, and we even made a solemn oath before God. To reinforce the seriousness of their promises, I symbolically shook the folds of my robe, invoking divine justice upon those who failed to comply. The entire assembly echoed a resounding amen, praising the Lord for the initiative. Shortly afterward, I assumed the position of governor of Judah. Unlike previous governors who exploited the people with heavy taxes and unfair demands, I decided to dedicate myself to the hard work of rebuilding the walls. My men were always by my side, working tirelessly. We did not seek personal gain. Our priority was the well-being of the community. Despite the responsibility of leadership, I remained humble and committed to the cause. We did not use our position for personal enrichment. At my table, 150 Jews and officials gathered every day, sharing a simple yet meaningful meal in communion and common purpose. I received ample provision of food and wine, but I never abused this offer, considering the heavy demands upon the city. However, when my adversaries learned that the walls were rebuilt, they plotted against me. Sanballat, Tobias, Geshem, and others invited me to a meeting in the villages of Ono, but I discerned their hostile intentions. Instead of falling into their trap, I responded wisely, refusing to interrupt my work to which I was so committed. They persisted, sending messengers repeatedly, trying to distract me and defame my name. But I kept my focus, aware of their schemes. Then, Sanballat attempted one last scheme, sending an open letter alleging that I was plotting rebellion, aiming to accuse me of aspiring to royalty. They even claimed that prophets were proclaiming my reign in Judah. But I did not fall for this trap and sent them back without yielding to their insinuations. I remained steadfast in my vision and upheld my integrity, refusing to stray from the path that God had assigned me. They may have tried to deter me, but my commitment to the reconstruction of Jerusalem remained unwavering. Everyone's trying to scare us, saying we'll falter in our work and won't finish. So I cry out to God, strengthen my hands. I didn't waste time crafting a detailed defense to prove Sanballat wrong point by point. No, I wouldn't stoop to that. You see, you can't satisfy men like Sanballat with facts, explanations, and evidence. They thrive on fear, and I refuse to give in to it. Sanballat wouldn't be defeated by being called a liar. He had enough insight to understand that the slander strategy was all about fear. No enemy can make us afraid, my friend. All they can do is try to make us choose fear, but it's up to us to reject it. However, the assassination attempts didn't stop there. When I entered the house of Shemaiah, who was confined, he told me to seek refuge together in the temple of God and to close its doors. He warned that they would come to kill me at night. But I told him that a man like me should not run away in fear and hide. No, a man like me should enter the temple to be saved. I wouldn't give in to fear. Shemaiah tried to fill me with fear and convince me to disobey God. However, following his advice would mean sinning against God. I realized that God had not sent him, but that the enemy had tasked him with prophesying against me, trying to intimidate me. He was an instrument of fear, but I didn't succumb to it. They would seize upon this to slander my reputation, attempting to discredit me. When news of the completion of the wall spread, the surrounding countries were filled with fear and lost confidence. They knew the wall had been built with the help of our God. Surprisingly, it took us only 52 days to rebuild the walls that had lain in disuse for over a century. It's not that the walls were unwanted. The destruction of Jerusalem's walls deeply affected the city's residents, but no one dared to go beyond the desire to see the walls rebuilt. When we finally finished, our enemies were discouraged. It's amazing to see how we managed to discourage them and leave them disheartened for a while. They not only saw the wall completed, but also clearly realized it was the hand of God that raised it. The strong and confident people of Jerusalem became a testimony to the neighboring nations. However, the nobles of Judah did not hesitate to befriend Tobias, our enemy, simply because he had family ties with many in the tribe of Judah. These nobles sent several letters to Tobias, who opposed the wall, and his responses continued to arrive. Many in Judah were committed to him, under oath, and kept informing me of his actions. After the wall was rebuilt and the gates were set in place, everything changed. I appointed guards for the gates, musicians, and Levites to lead the people in worship. The reconstruction of the walls was not just to make Jerusalem look grand, but to allow the people to worship God with more freedom and splendor than before. I placed my brother Hanani and Ananias in charge of the city because they were men of character and feared God. I ordered that the gates only be opened at sunrise while the guards were still on duty. And at nightfall, the gates were to be closed and the walls guarded by the residents, some on watch duty and others near their own homes. The walls were rebuilt, but we needed vigilant guards. Security was crucial. Despite the city being large and open, with few residents and houses yet to be rebuilt, God told me to gather the nobles and leaders of the people to record their genealogies. He wanted Jerusalem to thrive and grow even more. But before Jerusalem could thrive, I needed to understand who was already there. And it was during an inspection of the fallen walls that something incredible happened, a great revival. Just imagine the whole city gathered as one in the open square in front of the water gate. It was then that I asked Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded Israel. Ezra, who had already done important work rebuilding the temple and leading the people back to worship, presented the law to the assembly of men and women and to all who could understand. On the first day of the 7th month, he began to read the law in the square from morning until noon. And what a scene it was! Everyone was attentive to the book of the law, to Moses' teachings recorded in the first 5 books of the Bible. As governor, along with Ezra the priest and scribe and the Levites who taught the people, we proclaimed that day as sacred to the Lord, a day to rejoice and not mourn. The people were so moved by the words of the law that they began to weep. But we encouraged them not to be sad, to rejoice and share their food with the less fortunate, for it was a holy day. And so, amidst this revival, the word of God brought joy and spiritual renewal to the people of Jerusalem. My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story.